All right. We're moving forward with the history of warfare. We are going out of the ancient era and into the medieval era. So you know the deal. 6 battles. Here we go. In the late 2nd century, those living in China during the Han Dynasty had become very upset with their conditions. They believed the government was corrupt, and they believed the emperor had lost the mandate of heaven, meaning they no longer thought that the emperor had the divine right to be ruling. And various issues with farm yields, floods, and plagues were making things even harder. The people had had enough, so in 184, a revolt known as the Yellow Turban Rebellion began and quickly picked up steam. The Han dynasty struggled to quell the rebels since their resources had already been exhausted from past conflicts, and they simply couldn't deal with a rebellion that spanned such a large area of the empire. As a solution, Emperor Ling agreed to let regional commanders and warlords act with more autonomy to defeat the rebellion. This succeeded in eliminating the threat, but this also diminished the authority of the Han government and allowed these regional warlords to gain political power in their own areas. And one of these warlords that found themselves able to usurp the Chinese throne was Dong Zhuo, and this was met with widespread resistance. This ended in 192 when Dong Zhuo was assassinated by his own ally Liu Bu. In the following years, any semblance of Han authority vanished, and warlords all across China were vying for control. Eventually, the situation reached a point leading up to the year 200 where the warlord Cao Cao was becoming increasingly dominant in northern China. At first, Cao Cao and other warlords had allied to take out Yuan Shu's self-proclaimed Zhong dynasty, but once they were gone, the infighting continued. Cao Cao's attention was split between two fronts, Liu Bei to his east and Yuan Shao to his north. Cao Cao boldly went for an attack on Liu Bei and left his north exposed. Yuan Shao had the chance to catch Cao Cao off guard, but failed to defeat Yu Jin's defense. Liu Bei fled north to fight for Yuan Shao. When Yuan Shao decided to organize a second attack on Cao Cao, Yuan Shao's advisors urged him not to attack and told him he'd missed the proper opportunity, but he ignored these warnings and went ahead with the invasion. Fighting broke out along the Yellow River in the year 200. Yuan Shao launched a direct attack on Cao Cao's fortress at Boma. Cao Cao successfully defended it, but chose to retreat, knowing it would be difficult to continue defending it. Yuan Shao split from his main force, and as Liu Bei pursued the retreating army, Cao Cao was able to hit him with an ambush by distracting him with valuable items purposely left behind. Following this, both armies continued south. Cao Cao retreated to Guandu to prepare a sturdier defense, and Yuan Shao set up fortifications at Yangwu, just north of Guandu, and when one of his officers suggested leaving a smaller force nearby in case the incoming battle at Guandu didn't succeed initially, he ignored the advice. Before the engagement began, Yuan Shao made it clear he did not want a war of attrition, despite it potentially being a smarter option given Cao Cao's dwindling food supplies. He wanted a direct attack that would wipe out Cao Cao's numerically inferior army. Yuan Shao and Cao Cao's forces began fighting their respective earthen fortifications, with both sides constructing siege equipment like Yuan Shao's siege ramps to fire arrows on Cao Cao's forces, only for them to respond by building trebuchets to destroy their platforms. It soon became clear that neither side was making any meaningful progress, but things were about to change. So real quick, let's compare the food situations. Cao Cao is stuck at Guandu with limited supplies, so the longer the battle goes, the less likely it is he can defend for long. Yuan Shao is beyond the Yellow River and within Cao Cao's territory, meaning his food supplies, while more abundant, must be brought from outside sources. One such outside source lay east of the battlefield. Wu Chao and Gushi held vital stockpiles of resources needed for Yuan Shao to continue his campaign. Cao Cao learned of this from an officer that had defected from Yuan Shao's side and sent a smaller force to raid the area. In an attempt to discourage the raid on Wu Chao and Gushi, Yuan Shao sent his own detachment to attack a vulnerable spot at Guandu. This did not work, however, and Cao Cao held firm. Even better for him, the raid at Wu Chao was a success, and Yuan Shao's army had lost a catastrophic amount of their supplies. Yuan Shao's assault on Guandu still had not made any progress, so with an unsuccessful siege, a stubborn commander, and no food supplies, some of Yuan Shao's officers either surrendered or defected. Cao Cao led a counterattack, and Yuan Shu was forced to retreat back across the Yellow River. This battle resulted in a severe loss of power for Yuan Shao, who died 2 years later in 202. His successors fought amongst each other, allowing Cao Cao to invade, and in 207, Cao Cao was the dominant power in northern China. Alright, so there's this thing that might happen in this series where two battles that I talk about may have occurred within close proximity to each other, whether that be time, distance, or development. So in that case, I may not always provide the same amount of context, especially if that information is still relevant to the next battle I'm talking about. So yeah, let's keep going. Following Cao Cao's victory at Guandu, Liu Bei fled southwest to Liu Biao. The eastern state of Wu was now under the rule of Sun Qian, who campaigned in Liu Bao's territory. In 208, Liu Biao died of illness, causing a succession dispute between his sons Liu Kong and Liu Qi. The state then faced an invasion by Cao Cao, who sought to take advantage of the weakened government. Liu Kong surrendered, and Liu Bei, who was defending in the north, had to retreat. Cao Cao caught up to him at the Battle of Changban. Liu Bei then fled further southeast to meet up with Liu Qi. They knew that their combined force still wouldn't be enough to defeat Cao Cao, so they asked neighboring Sun Qian to join their alliance. Cao Cao tried to discourage Sun Qian from joining by claiming that he should surrender because his army was made up of 800,000 soldiers, which was a completely absurd exaggeration. In reality, Cao Cao's army numbered around 200,000. Sun Qian disregarded this and boldly went ahead with the plan to resist Cao Cao, and the alliance of the three warlords now numbered 50,000. On paper, the battle seemed impossible for Sun Qian, Liu Bei, and Liu Qi to win. After all, they were outnumbered 4 to 1. But here's the thing. Cao Cao's northern army was unfamiliar with this land, and since they were the invading force, were exhausted from marching through the marshy environment. Not only that, many of them were also suffering from disease. And also, Cao Cao was more experienced in land battles, and the upcoming fight would center around the Yangtze River, meaning there would definitely be some naval combat that his soldiers were not used to. The battle began when Cao Cao attempted to cross the Yangtze River and engaged enemy troops led by Zhou Yu on the other side, but the attack failed and both sides fell back. Things also were not looking good for Cao Cao's fleet on the river. Once again, the unfamiliarity with the terrain was a serious issue. The soldiers on board the ships were getting seasick, and this likely prompted Cao Cao to chain the ships together. This move was of particular interest to one of the officers serving the alliance, Huang Gai. Huang Gai told Cao Cao that he planned to defect to his side. Cao Cao accepted this, and his fleet stood waiting on the river. Huang Gai's fleet approached Cao Cao's fleet, and this was, in fact, a trap. The boats were full of flammable material, and were set alight by the crew, who then fled in smaller boats. And by the time Cao Cao's fleet realized what was going on, it was too late. The chains keeping the fleet stable had now doomed them, as individual ships were unable to maneuver away. And just then, Zhou Yu crossed the river to engage Cao Cao's land units. This assault proved to be extremely effective, as Cao Cao's units were scattered. This prompted Cao Cao to abandon the battle and quickly retreated north in a messy, disorganized struggle through the marshlands. Cao Cao left his cousin, Cao Ren, in charge of his garrison at Nankomanderi. When the allies caught up, they surrounded Cao Ren's position from all sides, but were unable to fully defeat him, allowing him to retreat to the north as well. The Allied victory at Red Cliffs put a complete end to Cao Cao's invasion of southern China, and he instead chose to maintain his northern holdings, establishing the state of Cao Wei. Liu Qi died of illness months after the battle, so Liu Bei would end up ruling the southwest, establishing the state of Shu Han, after spending some years gaining control of the region. Sun Qian had become weaker militarily in the years following the battle, and would maintain the state of eastern Wu. The period that followed in the early 200s would become known as the Three Kingdoms period. The northern state of Cao Wei underwent some changes in leadership, leading to Emperor Wu of Jin forming the Jin dynasty in 266, before unifying China in 280. Alright, so moving back to Europe, we find ourselves in a Roman Empire that is having a pretty tough time. In 235, Emperor Severus Alexander was assassinated. The decades that followed were known as the Crisis of the Third Century, and it featured numerous politicians and generals that at some point or another claimed the title of Roman Emperor. The Roman currency collapsed, there was plague threatening food supplies, and the empire as a whole was becoming increasingly decentralized. The severe decline in Rome's power allowed other states to branch off and form independent empires, such as the Gallic and Palmyrene empires. Rome managed to defeat these states and reunify under the leadership of Emperor Aurelian, but the crisis persisted after he was assassinated in 275. In 284, the reign of Emperor Diocletian began, and he was about to completely shake up the structure of Rome. It had been clear to everyone that maintaining and defending the borders of such a huge empire for so long was becoming increasingly challenging for a single governing body. So in 286, he split the empire in two, sharing power with Maximian. Then he did it again in 293, splitting the empire into four sections, led by Constantius, Maximian, Galerius, and Diocletian. This four-way split, also known as the Tetrarchy, managed to stop the chaos and did restore some stability. This wouldn't last long, however, and in 306 Diocletian abdicated his position, and the other tetrarchs soon fell into conflict, kicking off a series of civil wars. In 311, Constantine I ruled the far west, Maxentius ruled the Italian region, Licinius ruled the Balkans, and Maximinus ruled the east. In 312, Constantine conquered Italy and unified the West after defeating Maxentius at the Battle of Milvian Bridge. In 313, Licinius defeated Maximinus, unifying the East. And in 316, Constantine and Licinius entered into their own war. At the Battle of Cybele, Constantine soundly defeated Licinius, who fled to Thrace. Constantine defeated Licinius again, and the two agreed to a peace deal in 317. And this peace lasted until 324, when Constantine's troops entered into Licinius' territory while in pursuit of some barbarians, and Licinius responded by declaring war. And this prompted Constantine to begin a renewed invasion of the east. Licinius set up defense near the city of Adrianople, and Constantine arrived at the battlefield in July of 324. From the start, Constantine was at a disadvantage. His army of 130,000 faced a slightly larger force of 165,000. Licinius was well fortified on the other side of the river, meaning Constantine would need to cross the Hebrus River in order to make any kind of attack. So the only way to accomplish this without immediately losing half his army was to cross the river covertly. He scouted out a good location to cross the river at, and then he ordered building materials to be assembled at another spot, making it seem like he would cross there. Then, while Licinius's army was preparing to defend that area, Constantine assembled a cavalry force to gather under the cover of trees before crossing the river and catching the enemy off guard. As Licinius prepared to defend against a surprise attack, the rest of Constantine's army successfully crossed the river. Licinius retreated to a better defensive position, but Constantine's units managed to break through, and intense close quarter fighting began. During the fighting, Constantine regularly displayed the labarum, which was a new Roman standard inspired by Christianity, a religion that Constantine was becoming increasingly fond of. Later on during the battle, Constantine was wounded, and he ordered the charge to stop, which allowed Licinius to retreat from the battlefield after nightfall. Following the defeat at Adrianople, Licinius fell back to the coastal city of Byzantium. Constantine won key land and naval battles to drive Licinius back further into Turkey, where the two emperors would engage in one last battle at Chrysopolis in September 324. Soon after, Constantine ordered Licinius to be executed, and with that final victory, Constantine I became the sole emperor and successfully reunified the Roman Empire. In addition, Constantine would move the capital of the empire to Byzantium, which he then renamed to Constantinople in 330. Alright, so remember the previous episode where I talked about the Battle of Mobay and the war between China and the Xiongnu? Right. Well, that group of people may or may not have traveled west to Europe, where they would be referred to as the Huns. Now, look, it's possible that the Huns that would eventually invade Rome in the 5th century were the direct descendants of the Xiongnu that invaded China, but there is still a lot of scholarly debate going on over whether that is actually the case. But one thing is clear though, and that is that the Huns originated from the Eurasian steppes before moving west. So with that out of the way, let's get back to Rome. In the late 4th century, Rome had begun to formalize their relationship with the various peoples that lived on the northern outskirts of the empire. This was the case in the late 4th century when the Hunnic people arrived in Europe and invaded the homeland of these peoples, who fled into allied Roman territory. In the Balkans, some Goths tried to seek refuge, but were denied by the authorities in Constantinople, leading to the Battle of Adrianople. No, not the one we just talked about. I mean the one that took place in 378. It resulted in one of Rome's worst military defeats since Cannae against Hannibal. As we move into the 5th century, it becomes clear that Rome is having major difficulties maintaining order inside their own territory, as various Gothic attacks on the city of Rome itself started occurring. The one thing they had in common was a mutual threat posed by the Huns. Even then, Rome proved to be unable to effectively repel Hunnic invasions, having to split in two. In 434, a certain King Attila ascended to power to lead the Huns. The next year, the Treaty of Margus was signed, forcing Eastern Rome to pay tribute to the Huns. The Romans twice failed to pay reparations and were twice defeated militarily. In 451, relations between Attila and the Western Roman Empire broke down, and the Huns invaded Gaul. One thing to keep in mind was the fact that the various peoples in the area had mixed feelings about the invasion. Some tribes had fought alongside Rome in past wars and remained loyal, helping Rome resist the Huns. Other tribes, particularly ones who were forced into the treaties, viewed the Hunnic invasion as an opportunity to revolt and join the side of the Huns. Throughout the year 451, Attila campaigned through northern Gaul, conquering cities one after another, either through force or submission. The campaign had been doing fairly well until the siege of Aurelianum in June of 451, which was successfully defended by the Romans and their tribal allies. And this failure marked the end of Attila's advance, and he had to retreat northeast. The next major engagement would occur just a week later in the Catalaunian Fields, where Attila preferred to fight. Roman forces led by Flavius Aetius, accompanied by the Visigoths under Theodoric, and other tribes confronted Attila's forces, which were accompanied by his tribal allies. Estimates vary on how large of an army Rome could realistically support, especially at such a low point in the empire's history, but it's possible that the Roman allied force numbered around 60 to 70,000. The estimates on the Hunnic force and their tribal allies is also pretty shaky, considering that this was a moving invading army with few logistical bases. But let's say that it was also around 70,000. Attila's forces entered into a small skirmish with some Frankish troops loyal to Rome, but the main battle wouldn't take place until Attila finally found a suitable battlefield. Attila spent his time carefully preparing for the battle, so the fighting didn't begin until the afternoon. This way, he could retreat under the cover of night in case the Romans began to win the battle. Most of the battlefield was flat with the exception of the ridge on one side. The Visigoths on the Roman right flank occupied one side of the ridge, and the Hunnic left flank occupied the other side. Attila's forces charged on the Romans, attempting to break through their line and take the ridge. During the fighting, Visigothic King Theodoric was killed. Eventually, the Visigoths, unaware of their king's death, were able to push back Attila's left flank and attempted to take the other side of the ridge, exposing Attila's own unit. As the Visigoths under the command of Theodoric's son Torismond fell upon Attila's unit, Attila saw the danger and had to retreat all the way back to his fortified camp. The Romans and the Goths pursued the fleeing units and besieged Attila's camp. During this time, the Visigoths found their king Theodoric's body, which enraged his son Torismond, who demanded that they assault the camp. But Flavius Aetius, being the politician he was, decided against trying to kill or capture Attila. He predicted that if they eliminated Attila here, the Huns would be wiped out as a threat, meaning that that common enemy that the Romans and the Goths shared would be gone, and Rome would have to go back to dealing with the instability that came with managing the various tribes in the empire. So, he convinced Torismond and other groups to return to their homelands, and Attila retreated with what remained of his forces. Sources are shaky when it comes to the number of soldiers killed, but the death toll was definitely very heavy. Attila had withdrawn from Gaul, but in 452 went back to invading western Rome. His invasion of Italy yielded poor results, and before he went any further, he was convinced by Pope Leo I to retreat from Italy. Attila realized that any further attempts to invade the west would only do more harm than good to the Hunnic kingdom, which was ravaged by famine. Attila had made plans to march on Constantinople after the eastern half of the Roman Empire stopped paying tribute, but he died of internal bleeding in 453 before that could happen. With the death of Attila, the Hunnic kingdom declined in power as internal struggles weakened the state's authority, and external threats ultimately prevented the Huns from posing any threat to the Romans. But of course, the Romans had a long list of existential problems that extended far beyond the Huns. In 439, Gaiseric, the Vandal king who ruled part of Roman North Africa, broke the Foederati Treaty he'd signed with Rome, and conquered Carthage, which then became the Vandal capital, and other North African territory. From that point onwards, the Vandals would be a constant thorn in Rome's side, sacking the city of Rome in 455. They defeated the Romans in a naval battle at Cartagena in 460, and then in 468 defeated a combined force of over 1,000 Western and Eastern Roman ships in a huge naval engagement at Cape Bon. Eventually, peace would be reached between the Vandals and the Eastern Romans. And also, at this point, yeah, the clock had run out for Western Rome, and the empire had come to an end with the deposition of Emperor Romulus Augustulus after a seemingly endless period of territorial loss at the hands of the various barbarian kingdoms that had formed out of former Roman imperial territory. Fast forwarding to the reign of King Thrasimund, his reign from 496 to 523 saw severe military defeats by neighboring Berber groups. His reign was also notable for its religious persecution. See, the Vandals adhered to Arian Christianity, a branch of Christianity that was considered heresy by the Council of Nicaea all the way back in 325, and was condemned by the sitting Roman Emperor Constantine I. As a lasting consequence of this split, the mainstream Christians that adhered to the doctrines established by the Council of Nicaea, known as the Nicene Christians, faced persecution under the rule of the Arian Vandals, which did not sit well with Eastern Rome. Or should I call it the Byzantine Empire? Yeah, let's call it that. In 523, Hilderic became the king of the Vandals. He tolerated the Nicene Christians. His rule was pretty weak, however, and he was overthrown by Gelimer. Byzantine Emperor Justinian took note of this and decided to get involved. He demanded that Hilderic be restored to the throne, or else he would declare war. Gelimer refused, so Justinian prepared for an invasion of the Vandalic kingdom. He made peace with the Sasanian Persians to the east in 532, and in 533, Justinian sent an invasion force under the command of his trusted general Belisarius. The Byzantine fleet sailed from the Dardanelles all the way to modern-day Tunisia, south of Carthage. Once his forces had landed, Belisarius took great care in the PR department, making sure his soldiers behaved themselves, and even won the support of much of the local population, who still seemed to have some pro-Roman nostalgia. Belisarius marched north along the coast towards Carthage, accompanied by the Byzantine fleet. When Gelimer realized that the Romans were marching straight to Carthage, he told his brother Amadas to mobilize a defensive force at Ad Decimum, and he also ordered the execution of Hilderic, the Byzantines' preferred candidate for the Vandalic throne. The Vandals would prepare their defenses for a decisive battle with the Byzantines before they could threaten the city of Carthage. In addition, he had made sure that the easier road to Carthage was blocked, and Belisarius would need to pass through Gelimer's desired battlefield at Ad Decimum if he wanted to get to the Vandalic capital. Both armies numbered around 15,000, but the Vandalic force may have been larger. The Vandals had chosen the battlefield with the goal of encircling the Byzantines. The area was located between two bodies of water, creating a narrow pathway that the Vandals hoped they could use to hit Belisarius from both sides. Amadas was stationed with a small force on the main road and engaged the Byzantine detachment. Unfortunately for him, he was caught with very little protection from his forces, and he was killed in battle. The Vandals also had trouble to the west, where another Vandal force was surprised to see another Byzantine detachment straying from the intended road, and they too were defeated. Following these skirmishes, the main forces began to approach the battlefield, Belisarius along the road, and Gelimer from the south. One Byzantine detachment noticed that a nearby hill was a pretty good spot to hold onto for future encampment, and so they went to take it. Gelimer also saw the hill and rushed towards it as well, pushing back the Byzantine force and taking the hill. The Byzantine detachment fled back to Belisarius' main force. At this point, Gelimer unknowingly made a severe mistake by choosing to set up camp on the hill and holding on to what he believed was a strong position. See, Belisarius was not fully updated on the battle situation, so if Gelimer had chosen to pursue the detachment that was fleeing back to the main Byzantine force, Gelimer would have had the element of surprise and caught Belisarius off guard. So by failing to take the opportunity, Gelimer gave up the element of surprise, and it was now given to Belisarius, who attacked Gelimer as he moved away from the hill and into open plains. Once engaged in battle, the Vandal force realized that this was in no way favorable, since the Byzantine advance guard to the north could come back down to attack from the opposite direction. Gelimer made the difficult decision to retreat from the area to avoid getting trapped. And as a direct consequence, the city of Carthage would be left undefended. The next day, Belisarius was able to march straight into Carthage Roman style, and he left a good impression on the civilians by choosing to not pillage everything, and treating them as Roman subjects. Following the defeat, the recovery of Carthage would become the Vandals' main objective. Gelimer's brother, Sason, was sent north to regain control of Sardinia, which he did. Next, Gelimer regrouped his army and marched back east. To help with the advance on Carthage, Sason left Sardinia to join up with Gelimer, and as he approached, Gelimer took a more distant approach. He wanted to force Belisarius to get out of the city and face him in a single decisive battle. So first, he cut off the city's water supply by sabotaging the aqueduct connected to Carthage. He also wanted to undermine Belisarius' strength by testing the loyalty of the Hunnic soldiers in his army. The Hunnic soldiers in the Byzantine army were the least happy about being in Africa, and at this point in the war, victory still could have gone either way. So Belisarius went to them and said, "Alright, look, just bear with me, we're gonna beat the Vandals in a big battle and we're gonna win, and you'll all get rich. Sound good?" And that one big battle would come when Belisarius marched on Gelimer's camp at Tricamaru. Gelimer's brother, Tsatsone, was killed in that battle, and it was a major defeat for the Vandals once again. After this, Belisarius was able to capture other cities with little to no resistance. Finally, after being blockaded at his last stronghold, Gelimer surrendered, and the Vandal kingdom was fully overtaken by the Byzantine Empire, restoring Roman rule in Africa. Muhammad, the founder of Islam, died in the year 632. This resulted in a pretty messy dispute over who was the rightful successor, and it was marred by conflicting motivations. Different groups preferred different candidates, especially those who preferred Muhammad's cousin Ali, but the official decision came down to Abu Bakr, who became the first caliph, and this also marked the formation of the state known as the Rashidun Caliphate. Muhammad had led campaigns to take control of the Arabian Peninsula, but following the delay in campaigns due to his death, and the time it took to select Abu Bakr as the caliph, many Arab tribes had rebelled. This prompted Abu Bakr to go on a series of campaigns throughout the peninsula to regain the caliphate's control over Arabia. It was during these campaigns that another military leader, Khalid ibn al-Walid, a former enemy turned ally of the caliphate, was given a significant commanding role of Muslim forces. By March 633, the Rashidun Caliphate had unified the Arabian Peninsula. From there, Abu Bakr was faced with another challenge. The caliphate bordered two very powerful states, the Byzantine Empire to their west and the Sasanian Persian Empire to their east. Trying to maintain peaceful relations in this situation would not be a smart long-term strategy in the eyes of the caliphate, and it seemed like a conflict was inevitable. Following a few raids and skirmishes in Sasanian towns, it seemed like the Persians would be the first target of the caliphate's expansion, and with good timing too. See, as the Sasanian Empire had just managed to quell a 4-year-long civil war that saw its authority considerably weakened, and not to mention the war with the Byzantine Empire a few years earlier. Abu Bakr, of course, chose to send the talented general Khalid to lead the invasion of Persia. The Muslim forces that raided the Sasanian borders were met with little resistance, since the Persian Emperor Yazdegerd III did not consider them a serious threat. This gave the Muslims time to organize and prepare for their future invasion, which began in full effect in the year 633, with the city of Al-Hira as Khalid's primary objective. Starting from southeastern Mesopotamia, Khalid worked his way northeast. He met a Persian force at the Battle of Chains, fought at Kazima in April 633. There, Khalid inflicted heavy casualties on the Persians. The battle also revealed a major weakness in the Persian military, which was that of mobility. The Muslim forces tended to be light and mobile compared to the heavily armored Persian units. Khalid regularly moved away, forcing the Persians to pursue the Muslim forces, wearing themselves out in the process. Khalid then scored another huge victory at the Battle of River, in which several talented Persian commanders were killed. Seeing this, Yazdegerd now knew for sure that the Muslim invasion was putting him in grave danger, so he ordered the mobilization of new armies to defeat Khalid's forces. The Persians also realized the route that Khalid was taking and planned accordingly. The site of Walaja was chosen as the ideal spot for a Persian force under the command of Governor Andarzaghar to take on the Muslims in a decisive battle. Khalid learned of this and prepared for the engagement. The Persian force under Andarzaghar was roughly a similar size to Khalid's force. But another army under Bahman was expected to arrive in a few days to reinforce the Persians. Now, seeing as he only had a few days before Bahman would arrive, Khalid needed to end the battle as quickly and effectively as possible. The battle began in May of 633, on a flat plain between the two ridges. Khalid made the first move, ordering his battle to charge towards the Persian force. Andarzaghar was able to hold off the Muslim forces and was able to launch a counterattack, pushing the Muslims back. At this time, Khalid ordered his center to give ground while the flanks remained in place, causing the battle lines to drift into a crescent shape and... Oh, wait a second.
This was, in fact, a trap.
So as it turns out, unbeknownst to Andarzaghar, Khalid had a cavalry detachment on standby behind the ridge since the start of the battle, and now, with most of the Persian army inside the crescent, the Muslim cavalry closed off the gap, encircling Andarzaghar's army Hannibal style. The Persians suffered severe losses in the chaos that followed, though many Persians did manage to escape. Among them was Andarzaghar himself, who died of dehydration soon after the battle. Following the battle, Khalid won another important victory at the Battle of Ulai before capturing Al-Hira at the end of May. This city served as an easy launchpad for future conquests northwest, allowing Khalid to take over the rest of Mesopotamia and place the front line even closer to the Sasanian capital of Ctesiphon. In 634, Abu Bakr died from illness, and he was succeeded by Umar, who planned on continuing the conquest. That same year, however, the Muslims were unable to maintain their presence in Mesopotamia and were defeated later on by the Persians at the Battle of the Bridge. By 636, the situation changed greatly when the Byzantine Empire under Heraclius began to militarily support the Sasanian Empire. The attack was poorly timed, however, and Khalid was able to defeat the Byzantines at the Battle of Yarmouk. Meanwhile, another Muslim commander named Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas saw further victories in Mesopotamia against the Persians, leading to the capture of the Sasanian capital in 637. In the years that followed, a slow military struggle between the Muslims and the Byzantine-Persian alliance continued to rage on, with neither side able to make major progress until 642. The Battle of Nahavand resulted in the loss of many imperial Persian soldiers, as well as numerous senior military officials. By 651, Yazdegerd had been assassinated, and the Muslims had conquered most of the former empire with varying levels of resistance. Caliph Uthman succeeded Umar, and his administration oversaw the conversion of Persia to Islam, during which the official standard copy of the Quran was created. Over the course of the 7th century, the Islamic caliphates would go on to push back the Byzantine Empire, conquer North Africa, and become the strongest power in the region. And the struggle between the caliphates and their neighbors would greatly influence world history for years to come. Alright, so that's it for part 3. Uh, again, took longer than it should have. Motivation is what it is. It definitely took much longer to research this video than the last one, but like I said, more information available means more to draw from. So I also have to draw the line somewhere between going too much into detail and just oversimplifying the topic, you know. Because it's not like I'm dedicating a whole video to a single battle, no. I have to talk about 6 in one video. In any case, I do enjoy making this series and learning about new areas of history along the way. And I hope you also learned something from this. So, yeah. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. It's gonna be great.